We'll continue with Pride and Prejudice, and today we are going to discuss the major characters in this piece of fiction. The most important and most prominent character is Elizabeth Bennet, the novel's protagonist, and the second oldest of her five sisters. Elizabeth Bennet is lively, quick witted, sharp tongued, bold, and intelligent. So many adjectives. She is keen and perceptive. Keen and perceptive. But Elizabeth's pride in that very ability engenders a prejudice that almost hinders her happy future with Darcy. Mr. Darcy, or if we continue with the full name, Fitzwilliam Darcy. Elizabeth is not impressed by mere wealth or titles. Elizabeth Bennet is not easily impressed by wealth or titles. Rather, she values propriety, good manners, and virtue. So, we conclude the character of Elizabeth Bennet. It was a short introduction, and we move on to the next character, Mr. Darcy. And his full name is Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, an extremely wealthy aristocrat. Mr. Darcy is proud, haughty, and extremely conscious of class differences. So, we can say that he is just the opposite of Elizabeth Bennet. And this introduction about Mr. Darcy comes alive in the beginning of the novel. Later on, he changes, he matures. So, he is not to be considered as a static character. He is prone to change. He does, however, have a strong sense of honor and virtue and a degree of fairness that helps him to control his pride after Elizabeth rebukes him for his narrow minded perspective. So, Elizabeth pushes him for a change which he incorporates in his own self. Later on, he changes. The next character is Jane Bennet. The oldest Bennet daughter is beautiful, good tempered, amiable, humble, and selfless. And she is the sister of Elizabeth Bennet. Her good nature does not result in a level of naivete, especially when it comes to recognizing the wickedness of others. So, she could not recognize the wickedness of others. She thinks everybody is good and fair. Her sweetness leaves her vulnerable to injury from insincere friends like Caroline Bingley. A rather static character, Jane remains a model of virtue throughout the novel. Caroline Bingley is the sister of Mr. Charles Bingley. The next character is Mr. Bingley, or if we move on to his full name, that is Charles Bingley. Much like his beloved Jane, Charles Bingley is an amiable and good tempered person, mostly unconcerned with class differences despite his extraordinary wealth. So, he is also wealthy, just like Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, and both of them are good friends. His virtue proves to be his vice at times, since his modesty leads him to be easily swayed by opinion of others. So, he is gullible. A mostly static character, Bingley remains pleasant and in love with Jane throughout the novel. So, he could also be considered as a static character. The next character is Mr. Wickham, an officer in the regiment stationed at Meryton. Officer Wickham possesses a charm that hides his dissolute, untrustworthy personality. He is good looking, but he is, for the most part in the novel, a villain. He was godson to Darcy's father. However, Wickham betrayed Darcy by seducing  when she was only 15. Georgiana is the sister of Mr. Darcy. He also spreads false rumors about Darcy throughout Hertfordshire and Marathon. Overall, Wickham is driven by self interest revealed by his many romantic engagements. He is also a static character, and finally, he marries Lydia only because Darcy provides a financial incentive. In the epilogue, Austen implies that Wickham tires of Lydia after a certain point. So, it is assumed that Mr. Wickham will finally betray Lydia. The next character is Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet is a foolish and frivolous woman. She lacks any sense of propriety and neglects to provide her daughters with a proper education. Instead, she remains concerned solely with securing them profitable marriages. Her lack of self awareness constantly embarrasses Elizabeth and Mr. Bennet alike. So, she is not favored by her own husband, Mr. Bennet, and her own daughter, Elizabeth Bennet. The next character is Mr. Bennet. An intelligent man with good sense, Mr. Bennet displays an unfortunate disinterest in most of his family, besides Elizabeth. She seems to be his favorite. He seems weary after spending many decades married to interminable Mrs. Bennet. His complacency is shaken only when Lydia's poor decisions in the Brighton threaten her future. So, he finally comes into action when Lydia elopes with Mr. Wickham. One other important character in the novel is Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is a distant cousin of the Bennet family to whom Longbourn has been entailed. So he will inherit the property of Mr. Bennet because Mr. Bennet had no son. He is mostly a comic character because of his awkward mix of obsequiousness and pride. And notwithstanding the fact that he was a clergyman, he was a parishioner, he was a Protestant Christian minister, as well as the tiresome formalities of his speech. He was too formal in his speech, and that invokes a humor. Even after he marries Charlotte Lucas, Mr. Collins remains largely unchanged. So he could also be considered as a static character in the novel. That's all for today. We will continue in our next video. Thanks for watching.